This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Sue Herrera.
October surprise? The year's 10th month is often a doozy for investors, and this time around, a volatile presidential race could spawn some scary ups and downs. We'll tell you how to prepare your portfolio. On the rebound, 3 years after bankruptcy, Detroit is showing signs of life. We'll take you there. And taking a chance, how one company gambled on a health insurance startup and turned its employees from skeptics into believers. All that and more from Monday, October 3rd. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tyler Matheson. Sue Herrera has the evening off. October, it conjures images of changing leaf colors, fall sweaters, and some scary moments occasionally for investors. After all, October has brought frightful events like the 1929 stock market crash, Black Monday in 1987, and a 500-point drop on the Dow thanks to the so-called Asian contagion in 1997. Well, today brought none of those, but the month did start out on a down note as investors digested some economic news showing that construction spending fell for a second straight month. Tepid manufacturing numbers and oil prices hit a 3-month high. On renewed optimism, OPEC may well reach a deal to cut production. So all in, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 54 points to 18,253. NASDAQ was off a modest 11, and the S&P 500 off 7. David Kelly joins us now to talk more about the markets in October and whether or not the upcoming presidential election will have any meaningful impact on trading this month. He is the chief global strategist at JP Morgan Funds. David, always great to see you. So how about the election? Do you think that it has the potential to unsettle the markets?
Well, it could. I mean, we've looked at the data going back to 1990, and October is on average more volatile, but that really has a lot to do with October of 2008, which was really an extraordinary month. Other than that, actually, election year Octobers don't tend to be that volatile relative to the rest of the year, because usually people want to keep their powder dry until after the election, and also usually we're dealing with two relatively conventional candidates. I think this time around it's a little bit different because if Secretary Clinton wins, then it will seem much more like a continuation of the status quo. I don't think you get much volatility out of that. If Donald Trump wins, though, there'll be a lot of uncertainty about exactly what this all means. And, of course, markets hate uncertainty. So I think we'll have to watch these poll numbers. If the race tightens up or if it looks like Donald Trump is going to win, then I think you could probably see more volatility just because of that increase in uncertainty. You point out in your note today that you really can't get prosperous by saving anymore. Mm-hmm. That's a loser's game. So you've got to put a stake in the ground and do something. What are the somethings I ought to be considering now with my portfolio? Well, I think that the first point is really important, that traditionally you made about 2% over the rate of inflation just by keeping money in a savings account or in a CD. Now you make about 2% below that. So you're actually losing money every day you wait to decide. In terms of best long-term opportunities, I mean, we think that U.S. stocks still have got some potential to run here. We think we like those, particularly as some of the economic numbers overall are actually getting better, and earnings are doing better. So I think that looks good. But also long-term, we really like international stocks and emerging markets. They have been held back. But if you look at the global PMI data that came out today, we've got numbers from a lot of different countries. Overall, the global economy does seem to be waking up a little bit here. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in international stocks, which have lagged behind in recent years.
Where internationally, I mean, you can make a distinction between developed markets and emerging markets. Sure. Which would you tilt toward?
I think in the long run, probably a little bit towards emerging markets because, frankly, they are cheaper and they're more beaten down. Mm-hmm. And within developed markets, we really like the European story still, despite the problems that the banking sector there is having. Eventually, the European Central Bank's going to have to help the European banking system back to health. And when it gets back to health, I think that'll help European markets a lot. I'm not quite so positive about Japan. I think they've got long-term, very significant structural problems.
Give me a 30-second thought on where fixed income fits.
Well, I think you have to have fixed income in a portfolio because something could go wrong. I think you have to be, though, pretty pragmatic right now because if things calm down and the stock market starts moving up, we could have a little bit more inflation. So I'd be a little underweight fixed income, but things like emerging market bonds, high yield bonds, I'd be a little overweight those within fixed income in what I think is an improving global economy.
David, great advice. Thanks very much. David Kelly with JP Morgan Funds. Well, auto sales in September fell despite big discounts from Labor Day sales. Detroit automakers General Motors, Ford, and Fiat Chrysler all posted sales declines year over year, but Toyota showed a rise of 1.5%. Nissan had a 5% sales gain for the month. The research firm Autodata says overall sales came in at a seasonally adjusted rate of nearly 17.8 million, down from just over 18 million last September. Well, the fake accounts scandal continues to plague Wells Fargo. Today, the state of Illinois says it will suspend $30 billion worth of investing business with the bank for 1 year. Last week, California also suspended its relationship with the bank for a year. The Illinois treasurer says Wells Fargo stands to lose millions of dollars in fees from the move, and he said this might not be the end.
Our next step that we're looking at is sending in our people to look at their books to make sure they're in compliance with Illinois law. And if not, we'll have real problems.
Shares of Wells briefly touched a 52-week low, closing down 1% at 43.83. Well, shares of Deutsche Bank took a breather after a furious rally late last week when news leaked that a possible settlement between the bank and the U.S. Justice Department were close. Some of that enthusiasm faded over the weekend, and in fact, accusations flew at the U.S. from German politicians. Julia Chatterley has more from Frankfurt.
Deutsche Bank stocks under pressure once again in the US trading session today after markets were shut today for a holiday here in Germany. I think this is optimism leaking away after that rally that we saw on Friday amid reports we could see some kind of quick settlement between Deutsche Bank and the Department of Justice. It looks now like it's just going to take a bit more time. There is a silver lining though, and I think that is that after all the rumours that have been swirling, the bar now for investors to be satisfied with a number here is higher, even if it wipes out more than $6 billion worth of cash reserves that Deutsche Bank has set aside. Now, Deutsche Bank execs have also travelled to Washington this week, which is also important. Even the geography could play a part in facilitating talks between the two sides. But here in Frankfurt, I can tell you the accusations flying thick and fast. The main one being that this is the United States waging economic war on Germany. And I can tell you a big fine here will be seen as politically toxic for Angela Merkel. Get this from her deputy this weekend. He said, "I don't know whether to laugh or be furious that a bank who's turned speculation into a business model is now complaining that it's now the victim of speculation." The message here, zero sympathy for Deutsche Bank, and help this bank, Angela Merkel, at your peril. The bottom line, guys, is that ultimately we need to see what this settlement sum is, and for that we just have to wait. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Julia Chatterley in Frankfurt.
And today on CNBC, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said he thinks Deutsche Bank will be fine.
There is no reason that Deutsche Bank shouldn't get over its problems. They have plenty of capital, plenty of liquidity, and we want all these banks to get through because it's better for everybody that we kind of move on and just help do our jobs about funding society.
The British pound was sent reeling today, sliding to near a 31-year low against the dollar and hitting its lowest point against the euro in 3 years after Prime Minister Theresa May said over the weekend that the process to withdraw from the European Union will start in the first quarter of next year. That means Britain will be out of the EU by mid-2019. Well, the Supreme Court is back for its fall term and has plenty of big business cases on its docket. Hampton Pearson takes a look.
A still shorthanded Supreme Court begins the fall term with about 40 cases on the docket and more on the way. 2 high-profile business cases involving insider trading and the long-running patent dispute between Samsung and Apple will be heard in the first 2 weeks of the new term. First up, insider trading. In Salmon versus United States, the High Court must decide, does a person who leaks inside information have to receive a tangible personal benefit for someone who trades on the tip to be liable for insider trading? The justices must resolve conflicting rulings from lower courts.
In the U.S. v. Salmon case, the major issue there is what is considered to be a benefit in the sort of framework of insider trading.
On October 11th, the Samsung-Apple battle over smartphone patents comes to the Supreme Court. Just how much should Samsung pay Apple for infringing on iPhone patents used in Samsung smartphones? Samsung wants those damages limited to the value of the 3 components. Apple says it's the whole design of the product that counts. The design patent law dates back to the 19th century. A decision by the Supreme Court could have a ripple effect across the technology industry.
The danger is, in a world of complex products with many different components, you could create a situation where a company is effectively terrified that it's going to be hit for all of its profits if even one of those components is later held to be infringing on a design.
In recent days, the High Court has added a trademark free speech case involving racial slurs that could involve the ongoing battle over the name of the NFL Washington Redskins to its calendar. The court public session lasted just a few minutes today, Chief Justice John Roberts announcing the beginning of the new term, and the court issuing orders declining to take up the issue of pay for college athletes. And the High Court also turned down the Obama administration's request to rehear the president's plan to spare deportation of millions of immigrants in the country illegally. Court observers say the ideological split among the 8 justices and the need to find consensus could lead to cases being decided on very narrow legal grounds. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Hampton Pearson at the Supreme Court.
Coming up, Hillary Clinton takes on big corporate names, behaving badly, she says. New York's Attorney General has ordered the Trump Charitable Foundation to stop fundraising in the state immediately. The AG's office says the foundation is not properly registered to do so and has 15 days to supply the delinquent paperwork. The Trump campaign says it is concerned about the political motivations behind the investigation, but the foundation will fully cooperate. Well, over the weekend, a New York Times report said Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump claimed a tax loss of nearly $1 billion back in 1995. The Times said that loss could mean he paid zero federal income tax for nearly 2 decades. The move is legal and eye-opening. Robert Frank explains how the tax code can turn losses into gains.
When most taxpayers lose money or income, they never get it back. But Donald Trump's latest tax controversy shows that for certain wealthy taxpayers, a loss can actually be a gain. The New York Times reporting over the weekend that Trump reported a net operating loss of $916 million in 1995, which he could then use to erase income taxes on up to $916 million in earnings over 18 years. And it's all perfectly legal. And it's thanks to a little-known but very lucrative part of the tax code called the net operating loss, or NOLs. Now, NOLs were first enacted in 1918, and it only applied to 2 years of income at that time. The idea was to allow businesses to report a loss in one part of the calendar year that they could then make up in the next part of the calendar year. So NOLs allowed them to smooth over their tax payments. But over the years, it's expanded and exploded in size. In 1995, taxpayers could deduct losses for 18 years. Now it's more than 20 years. Taxpayers claimed about $50 billion in NOLs in 1996. In 2014, that number had ballooned to nearly $200 billion. The losses are helpful to the wealthy and wealthy business owners like Trump, whose company and income taxes flow through their personal income tax returns. Taxpayers can only apply these losses to companies they own or control, like LLCs, S-corps, and C-corps. And this is not to be confused with investment losses, which can only be used to offset capital gains, but can only reduce your personal income tax by a maximum of $3,000. But real estate developers like Trump have found ways to turbocharge the NOL provision. Designated real estate professionals like Trump can deduct multi-million-dollar interest payments on their building loans and the depreciation of their real estate, so they can report large paper losses while making huge incomes. Now, while use of NOLs is not uncommon among the wealthy, the magnitude of Trump's losses are almost unheard of. Now, accountants I talked to say the biggest NOL they've ever heard of was well under $100 million. The Trump campaign saying, quote, Mr. Trump is a highly skilled businessman who has a fiduciary responsibility to his business, his family, and his employees to pay no more tax than legally required. Now, we still don't know exactly how Trump generated the loss, and given that he's refused to release his returns, we may never have an answer to that question. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Robert Frank.
Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton took on what the campaign calls bad actors, companies like Mylan with its EpiPen price increases, and, of course, Wells Fargo.
Look at Wells Fargo. Really shocking, isn't it? One of the nation's biggest banks bullying thousands of employees into committing fraud against unsuspecting customers. It is outrageous that 8 years after a cowboy culture on Wall Street wrecked our economy, we are still seeing powerful bankers playing fast and loose with the law.
Eamon Javers joins us now from Washington. Eamon, what specifically did Ms. Clinton propose today?
Well, she did a couple of things, Tyler. One is by bringing up Wells Fargo, which is a scandal that's been in the news recently, but that a lot of Americans won't have heard of. She was able to tie that back to 2008, which is a scandal that a lot of Americans will definitely have heard of and are still feeling some pain from, and really hammer home that point politically. But in terms of the specifics, she raised a number of specific ideas that she'd like to see, including getting companies to do more profit sharing with their employees, and also taking on this idea that companies are able to force employees and customers into arbitration instead of into the courts. That's something she would like to change. We have a soundbite of what she said on that point, and here it is.
We are not going to let corporations like Wells Fargo use these fine print gotchas to escape accountability. And in fact, this is now common practice across a lot of industries.
She also said that she'd like an exit tax for companies that leave the country, and she'd like to do something about companies offshoring jobs as well, Tyler.
Did she pick up on the tax business involving Mr. Trump at all in her speech?
She sure did, and she said this is Donald Trump to a T. Obviously, this is a huge boon for the Clinton campaign. It allows them to portray Donald Trump as a wealthy, out-of-touch plutocrat, and that's exactly what she did on the campaign trail today.
And Mr. Trump firing back in his way, saying he has no obligation to pay more than the tax laws insists that he do.
Yeah, Trump today said something interesting on this point. He said, yes, the tax code is unfair, and I know because I'm a beneficiary of that unfair tax code, and that's why I'm the guy to fix it. Contrasting himself with Hillary Clinton, who he says has worked in government her whole life and has never created a job in the private sector.
All right, Eamon Javers, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
You bet.
Well, Bass Pro Shops hooks rival Cabela's, and that is where we begin tonight's Market Focus. Bass will pay $5.5 billion for the sporting goods chain Cabela's, which had been struggling with falling sales and had been under pressure to put itself up for sale from the activist hedge fund Elliott Management. It bought an 11% stake in the company last year. Shares of Cabela up more than 15% on the day to close at $63.18. Speaking of deals, the asset managers Henderson Group and Janus Capital will combine in a merger of equals. The firms announced today. The British-based Henderson will buy its U.S. rival Janus in a $2.5 billion all-stock deal, a move that will help both firms cut costs. The combined firm will have $320 billion in assets under management. Janus shares surged more than 12% to close at $15.70. Facebook dips into the e-commerce world with the launch of Marketplace, a platform that lets users buy and sell goods with other nearby users. Marketplace, a feature available only on smartphones for now, will provide a more formal space for user-to-user exchange, similar to eBay and Craigslist. Shares of Facebook up 50 cents, not percent, 50 cents to $128.77, while shares of eBay fell 1% to $32.56. The European Union's antitrust authority said today it will pick up its investigation into the $130 billion merger between Dow Chemical and DuPont after the companies provided the missing information requested by the Commission. The EU regulator said it will decide whether to approve the deal by February 6th. Shares of Dow rose 59 cents to 52.42, while shares of DuPont were up 87 cents to 67.84. Well, after filing for bankruptcy several years ago, the city of Detroit is now undergoing a massive revitalization. And as Brian Sullivan tells us, Detroit is rebuilding and on the comeback trail thanks to the help of the city's public and private leaders.
Detroit filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago, but given all the growth, it feels a lot longer ago than that. Companies and their workers are once again moving downtown, and restaurants and retail are popping up everywhere. Quicken Loans founder Dan Gilbert is the man behind much of the rebirth. He's been buying and rebuilding millions of square feet downtown, and his Greektown casino and hotel complex has become the centerpiece of the action. We asked Gilbert how much more still needs to be done.
You're always trying to improve, no matter who you are, even New York City, I'm sure. They're always trying to improve things and get things better. So, here, certainly downtown, we've made, substantial progress, downtown, midtown. But the neighborhoods are just a huge part, or if not the majority part of Detroit. And so, you have to have jobs in the central core, because whether you live here or you live in the neighborhoods, these are where the jobs are. Even jobs in those neighborhoods are great, but we have blight coming down in the neighborhoods, and we have new residential neighborhoods actually going up for the first time in decades here.
For the first time in 60 years, Detroit may have stopped shrinking. The population is holding steady, and local college graduates are sticking around instead of leaving the state to find opportunities elsewhere. The Ilitch family is another reason why. They founded Little Caesars Pizza and own both the Detroit Tigers and the Red Wings hockey team. Their District Detroit program has committed more than $1 billion to build apartments, office space, retail, and a new hockey arena. And Ilitch says there's a chance the Detroit Pistons basketball team could also be moving downtown.
I hope it happens and hope to, I hope he's got something to announce before long.
But all this development hasn't come without criticism. While downtown takes off, some complain that the poorer areas are again being forgotten. Gilbert says that criticism is unfounded.
It's all connected. I mean, the only difference between the neighborhoods and downtown is, people's, when you look at a map and say, here's neighborhoods, here's downtown, but basically it's one city. The mayor has first of all done a great job of getting that blight down. To me, that was the number one thing that had to happen. Almost 11,000 homes have been taken down in the last few years, 2-3 years. They needed to come down. There's a lot more to go.
It's obvious there is still work to be done. Nobody's saying Detroit's comeback is complete, far from it. But for the first time in a long time, it's beginning to feel like Detroit's economic engine is once again firing on all cylinders. For Nightly Business Report in Detroit, Michigan, I'm Brian Sullivan.
And up next, we'll show you how one startup is trying to make it easier for employees and employers to navigate company health plans. Finally tonight, it is open enrollment time for many companies. So what would you think if your company said it was dropping one of the big firms to go with an insurance tech startup? As Bertha Coombs tells us, one video game maker did just that and loved it.
The only thing I would change there actually is
Gina Hope loves her job marketing games like Call of Duty. Her health insurance was another thing. Her child's provider was out of network.
I have a son with special needs. It's a learning process every time somebody new comes into the picture.
When Activision Blizzard switched to a new insurer, she mentioned to HR that once again the provider was not covered.
Next thing I know, I get an email back that they had signed up my son's provider and brought them in network for me without me even asking, without me making a phone call. And this year it saved us $17,000.
That kind of service is why Activision's HR chief took a chance on startup insurer Collective Health.
We don't have all of the muscle power like a Microsoft would have to push a carrier around to push them to do things that make sense to us, but I have a mentality that we deserve that kind of treatment.
Launched in 2015, the San Francisco-based benefits manager uses a data-driven platform to make managing health benefits easier for both employees and HR departments.
We have the luxury of starting from scratch, and we can create a system that's built on modern software that allows us to create that member experience that feels like the best of consumer tech products.
They also have the luxury of just focusing on benefits because they pay larger insurers like Blue Cross to use their medical networks.
That allows Collective Health to focus on using its data to help its clients better understand what's happening with their health and wellness benefits. Like a lot of self-insured companies, Activision Blizzard offers its employees dozens of wellness programs. Collective Health helps them weave them all together in order to make them more effective.
So if we get somebody who we recognize from our claims data, looks like they're going to have a major surgery coming up, we can direct them to get a second opinion.
Their old insurer was not as proactive.
Our healthy pregnancy utilization is triple what it was under our conventional carrier's watch. I know that the cost of members that are continuously engaged is actually lower per year by about $800 per member that's continuously enrolled in our Healthy Incentive Program.
But maybe the biggest payoff?
I've never raved about my insurance previously, but it just that they treated me like a person and that my situation was unique and special.
For Nightly Business Report, I'm Bertha Coombs.
And that is Nightly Business Report for tonight. Thanks for being with us. I'm Tyler Mathisen. We appreciate your viewing. We'll see you back here tomorrow.